How do you heal a hamstring strain fast? If you've recently injured your hamstring running or doing some other sporting activity, you probably want to get back to activity as quickly and as safely as possible. And that's what I'm going to teach you in this video. I'll tell you what the recovery timelines are if you have strained your hamstring, and what exercises and other things that you can do so you can get back to the activities that you enjoy without a risk of re-injuring your hamstring. Now, if you find this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of more helpful tips to stay active, mobile, and healthy without pain. So the fastest way to heal a hamstring strain is not to re-injure it. And that sounds pretty obvious. It sounds like a no-brainer type of tip. But truly, there's not a lot you can do to biologically speed up a hamstring strain. But there are a whole bunch of things that you can do to slow it down. And the fastest way to get a hamstring strain better is to let biology take its course and not do anything to mess it up. And to understand that a little bit better, you need to understand what exactly a hamstring strain is and what causes it, so you can know how you can get back to activity without doing those things that caused it in the first place. So a hamstring strain is a stretch or a tear of your hamstring muscle. And the engineering term strain actually means a change in length. So a strain of the hamstring is when it's become overstretched or gotten partially torn. So the last thing that you want to do is stretch a muscle that's been injured by being overstretched. Now, how does that typically happen? It's usually caused by running or some other sporting activity where you have your leg extended or stretched out, and then you're exerting a high level of force on it at the same time. That'll typically happen at the end of the run when you're tired already. Maybe your glute muscles, which you should be using to help you extend your hip, have already tired out, and you're using exclusively your hamstrings to pull while they're in a stretched position. And what happens is your hamstrings are already under tension from being stretched out like that, and then they're trying to contract at the same time. And you've already got a weak area in your hamstring. It may just be that sharp contraction while under stretch is enough to pull or tear the hamstring. Now, what exactly is a pulled hamstring? A pulled hamstring is really just a milder grade of hamstring strain, where the muscle is just pulled or overstretched, but it's not torn. It would be synonymous to maybe what we would call a grade 1 hamstring tear, where it's just pulled, but it's not torn. A grade 2 tear is where there's a slight tear in the muscle, and a grade 3 would be what you would call a rupture of the hamstring, where it completely comes off the bone, or there's a full thickness tear through the hamstring, and that takes a really long time to heal. So there's no fast healing from a grade 3 hamstring strain. That is truly about a 3-month process just to get moving again, and probably 6 months to full return to unrestricted sports activity. So hopefully you don't have that. Hopefully you have a milder strain. But there are actually some other things that have similar symptoms to a hamstring strain that are not quite so serious. So if you're in a position like this and your sciatic nerve is under tension, you can actually pull or tension the nerve. And the good thing about that is there's no tissue damage with that. So if you can take the pressure off the nerve, you can heal from those symptoms of a hamstring strain quickly. Now, what if you actually do have a true hamstring strain? What should you do for that? As I mentioned before, stretching is not the proper treatment, especially not early on in the rehab, and particularly not if it's a higher grade strain or tear where the muscle actually is torn. That overstretching that overstretched muscle is just going to further re-injure it. And again, the fastest way to heal a hamstring strain is not to further re-injure it. So what do you do if you don't stretch it? Well, usually the muscle has become weakened because there are areas in the muscle where it is already overstretched and other areas where it's tight. If you look at any muscle, but your hamstrings in this case, under a microscope, you'll see muscle fibers that kind of overlap like this. And they overlap in areas called sarcomeres. Basically, those sarcomeres, they don't line the whole length of the muscle, but they're lined up back to back to back to back to back. And so some may be overly lengthened while other ones are overly stiff. And if some of those sarcomeres are overly stiff, it's going to make other ones have to work harder when you stretch your leg out like that. And it's usually the overstretched ones that become injured. So how do you stretch the stiff ones without overstretching the already overstretched or torn ones? Well, you can't do it with a typical hamstring stretch like that, because that just stretches the whole muscle. So you have to be a little more localized, a little more isolated. And to do that, you treat areas in the non-injured part of the muscle called trigger points, basically knots in the muscle. And you can do that a variety of ways. You can do it with a rolling pin like this, or just a baking rolling pin, or one you specifically use for muscles where you're just rolling back and forth like that. But again, you don't want to go on the injured part of the hamstring. You want to go on the non-injured part of the hamstring where it doesn't hurt. Now, it may hurt a little bit when you put some pressure on the area, but not in the area where you're having the main pain, your primary pain. You can also do it with a foam roller where you roll back and forth on it. I don't recommend this personally for a hamstring strain because this kind of hurts when you don't have any injury. But to do that, you would roll along, again, the non-injured part of the muscle. You can also just do manual treatments where you find the knots in the non-injured part of the muscle and you put pressure on them. And you can do that just with your knee bent where the hamstring isn't under tension, where it's kind of, you can move the muscle around in your fingers, find the sore spots, and just put a little bit of pressure on those areas. There are some other treatments that we can do in therapy, either with some tools or putting pressure on them where we kind of locate the knots, or actually dry needling in the non-injured area of the muscle is a really good treatment for a hamstring strain. And if you do need some one-on-one help with that, contact us at More for Life. We'd be happy to help you out with those things. So what do you do in addition to stretching the non-injured part of the hamstring muscle? Well, the other parts of the muscle, or the other part of your leg, the hip flexors in the front, if they're really stiff, your hamstrings have to work under more force just to overcome the resistance of your hip flexors on the front. So stretching your hip flexors, the opposing muscle to your hamstring, is actually a pretty good thing to do. And I've got a more extensive video on how to stretch your hip flexors. It's got a couple different variations, 4 different variations that you can use. I'll link to that for more details on the hip flexor stretch. Now, what about strengthening exercises? Should you strengthen your hamstrings after you've had a hamstring strain? Well, strengthening isn't a good idea right at the initial part, because if you're generating tension on a torn muscle, you can just tear it a little bit more. But eventually, if you want to get back to full unrestricted activity and get back to running, you're going to need to be able to strengthen your hamstring to be able to get back to doing the things that you used to be able to do. Now, leg curls are the things that people think of primarily as hamstring strengthening exercises. And those are okay hamstring strengthening exercises. They do work the muscle really well, but that's not really the way you use it in function, and particularly not in athletic activities where your hamstring is actually a hip extensor. You use it to extend the hip behind you. Now, when you're running, you really should be doing that with your glutes primarily in addition to your hamstrings. So using more of a hip extension like that. So hip extension exercises where you use your glutes are great ways to do that. You can do it laying on the floor where you're laying on your belly with your knee bent and just lifting the knee up. You can do it in quadruped like this, where you're raising one leg up with the knee bent. And when you have the knee bent like that, you strengthen primarily your glutes, not your hamstring. So you're strengthening the muscle that helps your hamstring to extend your hip. And that's one way you can avoid re-injuring the hamstring muscle again in the future. Now, what about when you're getting the hamstring stronger at the end ranges of your healing so that you can get back to activity? How do you do that? Well, deadlifts are one great example. Start out with body weight. You push your hips back and come up like that. Push your hips back, squeeze your glutes and your hamstrings together to extend your hips. You can progress that to a single leg deadlift. And again, this is with very little to no weight initially when you're starting out. It gives you the balance aspect, which you need when you're landing on one leg when you're running, or even when you're walking. And it also gives you some strengthening of your hamstring and your glutes together, the way that they work in normal daily function. So what else can you do to recover from a hamstring injury? Well, the biggest thing that you can do to recover from a hamstring injury and to keep from injuring it again in the future is understanding what caused it in the first place. And if you were tired or having poor running form that caused you to use more of your hamstring to contract when it was either at the end of a race, when your glutes were tired, or you just weren't using your glutes enough to push off with from the first place, getting tips to fix your running form or whatever activity you were doing that caused you to tear it in the first place is a really good idea. And if you need help with that, to find out what caused it in the first place, what muscles were contributing, what muscles may have been tight, for example, your hip flexors, what might have been weak, and what you can do in your individual case to heal as quickly as possible, we'd be happy to help. Give us a call at More for Life. We'll get you put in for an appointment and help you find out how you can heal your hamstring strain as fast as possible. And if you found this video helpful, give it a like and subscribe to our channel so you can get notified of more tips to stay active, mobile, and healthy without pain. Thanks for listening and have a great day.